This is the levels of biological organization. If you're following along with the slide deck, you'll want to skip the next two slides, the homework check slide and the study slide. Instead, I would like you to focus on when you see something like the learning goal. In this case, it is to explain and apply the hierarchical levels of biological organization, and is to explain how structure relates to function at the cellular and tissue level. And the first one, the first learning goal, is just this, the levels of biological organization. You see cells, tissues, organ system, and organism. That's it. You have to memorize this in the correct order. When we dive deeper into this, the first and the smallest one is the cell. At this level, we consider it the smallest, simplest structure of life. There is one simplified function, and, for a small detail, 200 plus different types. In med school, you will be learning about those types. The next level up, we see tissues. Now, notice that it is a group of similar cells. This is a group of the previous level. You'll notice this as a pattern as we go on, working together to do more complex functions. Keep this in mind as we go forward. We are, however, going to deep dive into tissues. There are four types of tissues. The first one is the epithelial tissue. Think of it as exit. When you think exit for epithelial tissue, both start with the letter E, you can think of it like as found on the body's surface. Like if you're trying to exit a cell, it is now the surface. The passé on top that Mr. Vo wrote is to remind you a way to memorize the five main functions, because they are P, protect, like in the epidermis or skin. A, as in absorb, like the gut or intestines. S, as in secrete, or saliva. S, for surface transport, breathing and swallowing. And excrete, like digestive waste. As a side note, when we say surface transport for breathing and swallowing, we don't mean the entire function of breathing and swallowing as we colloquially understand it. We are talking on the tissue level. So when we say surface transport, we're talking about what are the things happening, when air is breathed in, and then what do the lungs do? Now remember, there are four types. The second type of tissue is called connective tissue. This one's fairly straightforward. As the name suggests, it supports linked structures within the body. There are four types here. The first one is the matrix and interstitial space. This is the area between cells and organs. The matrix and interstitial space is going to be a bit of a tough memorization. You're going to have to learn these new vocab words. The reason it's called matrix is because there is this interconnected space between cells, and it looks and resembles like a matrix. If you don't know what a matrix is, it's simply usually a bunch of cells, looks like a crosshatch. For interstitial, we just simply mean between the cells. Number 2 and number 4 would generally make sense to a lot of people. When I say connective, is the cartilage and the bone. They're connecting pieces of your body together. What makes the most sense to a lot of people, and also the least amount of sense to a lot of people, is blood. Blood you would consider maybe free-flowing. However, it is considered, in my opinion, by far the most important part of connective tissue. The most common one, and also, in my opinion, the most forgotten one. The third type of tissue is the muscle tissue. Muscles helps the body move and is made mostly of protein. By now, I feel like most people know this almost as common knowledge. There are, in fact, three types. You have smooth, skeletal, and cardiac. We're not actually going into detail for each one. You just have to memorize that there are those three, since we did not list any more details. I'm going to preview a little since I get really geeked out about this stuff, but because of the way these muscles look under the microscope, you can actually identify either of these three if you were to be given a sample and to be able to look under a microscope without knowing where the source was. Smooth muscle is the stuff you find inside of intestines, stomach, your esophagus, your lungs. Skeletal is the ones we usually think of as muscles, the kind that you're building when you're weightlifting. And cardiac muscles are very specific to the ones found in your heart. The last kind of tissue is the nervous tissue. Nervous tissue, as the name suggests, is found in your nerves. It communicates using electrical and chemical signals. By far, of all the tissues, this is the one I geek out about the most. I'm not going to be able to spend too much time. All we're saying is that there are two types, neurons and glial. But once you start studying into further biology, especially anatomy, nerves are some of the craziest ones that you can deal with. And they have very interesting functions. There are literal ones that look like they should be machinery, but it's actually organic. This is when it gets really intensely just amazing when you're studying the human body. We take a big step back and remember that we were talking about the 5 levels of organization. There were cells and then tissues. Tissues were a group of cells. So now organ is a group of tissues. And there is an even more complex function than what tissues were doing. The examples for organs are heart, lung, brain, intestines, and most medical professionals, as well as researchers, as well as biologists, would agree skin is one of the organs. And this is because it is a connected group of tissues. And when we study further, it becomes very obvious why they think that. Intuitively, we as people on a colloquial level wouldn't think that right off the bat. Then we have organ systems. This is a group of organs that function to do similar purpose. So now remember me saying that there was a pattern. Tissues are a group of cells, organs, group of tissues, and organ systems are a group of organs. So obviously, if we go to the level after this, you know what to expect. Interestingly, we're not going to cover organism. This is something that is mentioned, but when you start talking organisms, you almost have to do comparative studies. So this is why if any of you do go to college and start taking anatomy or biology classes, you'll see either units or entire courses called comparative anatomy. That's what you want to take if you want to understand the differences between organisms. Because at that point, you're talking about the difference between, say, one species of bird versus another, versus entire different families, like the difference between reptiles and mammals. And it gets very interesting at that point because you're looking at differences of not just organs, you're also looking at differences of, say, particular cells. And now is the point when I think you should be looking at the study sheet. Before I get to it, I want to make a mention that organizing this information is incredibly useful, especially for someone like me. When I'm thinking about what I just heard them talk about, it's useful to remember back to the original things they said. The goal was to cover hierarchical biological classification. So the very first slide they showed us after that is this: cells, tissues, organ system, and organism. And that's it. That's all that was told to us, right? So you have to memorize that in order. And then they gave us a slide about each one, gave us a brief definition. There's a lot more to say, but there is a seemingly pattern, so this seems to be relatively easy to memorize. Then we did dive deeper into tissues, talking about epithelial, connective, muscle, and nervous. And then under each one of those, we had to memorize a whole bunch of lists. This helps you understand then that this is essentially a file of knowledge bits. You have to memorize, I think, about 20 to 30 data points at this stage. So this is why we're going to talk about their study sheet. So for the information you have to study, you should look at the flashcards and organizers. The organizer we saw earlier helps you understand where you should be taking your brain when I say certain words. When I say tissue, you're like, that's the one that has a lot of information that we can now parse out. The rest is usually simple definitions. What you should do then is for each data point that was given to you, you should break it down into simple data points and use flashcard or Quizlet. When it's available, Mr. Vo and Mr. Tong will go ahead and share with you guys some that they've created to help you study. Otherwise, it's going to be on you to go ahead and create your own study guides like flashcards or Quizlets. The trick to flashcards, however, is that number one, it needs to be simple data points. For an example, this is probably one of the longest you can do. Anything longer than this becomes not useful. The example is list 4 types of tissues, and this one, it doesn't matter what order, so you can come up with whatever acronym you'd like. but you can say muscle, connective, nervous, epithelial on the back of that flashcard. The practice needs to be within 3 seconds. When you're doing this as practice, you pull out the card and you say, oh, list the 4 types of tissues. If within 3 seconds, either by yourself or with a partner, and they're counting for you, 1, 2, 3, you haven't finished saying all 4 types, you can consider that incorrect. You flip the card around and check the answer and immediately put it down on a pile that you will redo. The ones you get correct, you put it on a separate pile. And you do this over and over until there are no cards that show up in a pile that you need to redo. Now, teachers do not have to do examples like this, and textbooks a lot of times do it just to illustrate, to make sure that you understand something. They don't have to. The information that you need for the exam has already been given. At this point, these are ways to help explain and help you understand better the information we just told you. So the example that Mr. Vo is providing, an excellent one by the way, is we're going to go from cell level all the way up to organ system and see how, when we say something is more complex, is exemplified. The red blood cell is very simple. It's illustrated on the right side, and you have a simple structure, round, spherical, right? Well, spherical-ish. Its shape increases surface area and the flexibility which is needed for the function to transport oxygen, carbon dioxide gas in the body. On the next level, we ask, well, what tissue is it? Well, if you remember, we did say that there was blood under connective tissue. So now it's a connective tissue, specifically blood. Now, this function is to transport gases as well. Just keep in mind that was what cells were. Also white blood cells, platelets, sugars, fats, proteins, such as antibodies, albumin, and hormones. So when we say there's a more complex function, it's something like this. It's similar, but not quite. Before it was just gases, and now there are other cells involved, also some more complex molecules, things like that. So at the level after that, we have what organ. And there could be several you could look at, but the main one for this one is we're going to be thinking is the heart. A lot of you might think of, well, this makes absolute sense. When we're talking about the heart, it's all about the blood. And in this case, the function is to pump blood into the body to deliver, i.e. transport, oxygen, nutrients to other organs, and it helps remove waste products. So, the organ system, well, before we do that, what tissues are involved? You'll see that there is epithelial, connective, muscle, and nervous. For epithelial, it has the endocardium and epicardium to protect against erratic blood flow. We have connective tissue, like the blood itself. Then we have muscle, the cardiac muscles, with stripes, intercalated discs, and branches to help them move. And of course, the nervous tissue. There is particularly pieces like the SA node and the AV node, and these start the electrical signal. When you guys are studying into more anatomy, this stuff immediately becomes things you have to memorize about the heart. So please keep that in mind. This, in the meantime, is simply just an example. So finally, when we look at the organ system, we say there are lungs involved, blood vessels, and these are all part of the cardiovascular system. And their whole job is to pump, circulate blood in the body to deliver oxygen, nutrients to the cell, help remove waste products, and not listed here, but when we talk about this idea of more and more complex functions, the whole circulatory system isn't just to pump blood and nutrients. It is also to be there to collect, to transport, to have messaging systems. And so when you involve a lot more other things and they all have different functions, they increase their abilities to do things. This is what we mean by increased and more complex functions. For those of you continuing on, there are in fact examples of these systems, but we will not revisit them until the end of the year. So that's it.